Hello and welcome to Get Sleepy, where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. I'm your host, Thomas. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. We'll begin a dreamy retelling of the classic tale Beauty and the Beast. It's a perfectly autumnal story to lead you into a good night's sleep. Let's just take a moment to settle in and let go of any unease lingering in your body or mind. Make yourself comfortable, and as you ease into stillness, allow your breathing to draw out a little longer, particularly on the exhale. Focus your attention as much as you can on your breathing. Let the slow, steady rhythm of the airflow become a mindful and soothing experience. When I speak to you here before each story, I try to say the things I know I would want to hear if I were falling asleep to this show. I found the process of getting to sleep rather difficult throughout much of my life. I still have bad patches nowadays, but I've gradually learned to remain calm and not let it stress me out on those difficult nights. Yes, it can make the next day more challenging, but getting worked up about it only brings more wakefulness. So remember, while you listen tonight, you can use your breath to help calm any stress, tension, or worry. It's a simple yet effective way to soothe the nervous system and guide you into a beautiful night's sleep. And that's especially true when you combine those deep breaths with a dreamy bedtime story like this one. It's a tale as old as time. So, without further ado, drift into the fairy tale world of Beauty and the Beast. There was once a merchant named Laurent who staked his entire fortune on a fleet of ships but lost them all at sea. Being a widower, he didn't have to take this news home to a wife. However, he had 6 children who had grown used to a life of relative privilege. When the debts were called in and rumor spread that the family was penniless, most of them took the news hard. As days turned into weeks and the ships didn't appear in the port, the merchant had to begin selling their fine furniture, their carriage, and even his daughter's jewelry and expensive dresses. They had to give up their richly appointed house and move to a cottage on the outskirts of town. Laurent was frequently away, visiting business acquaintances and trying to find partners who might invest and help him rebuild his business. While he traveled, his children, 3 boys and 3 girls, were left to keep the house on their own. Although they were practically adults, the 3 boys and the 2 oldest girls were largely useless when it came to practical skills. They had become accustomed to a life of study and idle luxury. The youngest daughter, whose name was Camille, was the most willing to take on the necessary household chores now that they were without servants. Perhaps it was her more impressionable age, or perhaps it was that she had a sweeter, more steadfast temperament. Whatever the reason, Camille did the best she could to learn the basics of running a household. Laurent, who was truly liked by the people in the village, did not have many friends to help his family. To make matters worse, the 5 older children made no effort to adjust to their new lives. They did nothing to prove themselves capable or to earn the goodwill of others who might have helped them. Camille, however, sought advice from the villagers about unfamiliar skills such as baking, sewing, gardening, and keeping chickens. Their wariness gradually turned into genuine affection as they came to appreciate her willingness to learn and work hard. Over time, she became the glue that held Laurent's household together. While her 5 older siblings struggled to accept their fate, unable to change it, Camille quietly ensured that they had a tidy home and food on the table. One day, after the family had been living this way for nearly 2 years, Laurent received word that one of his lost ships had finally appeared in the port, its cargo largely intact. The family rejoiced at the miraculous news, believing their fortunes had finally changed. The 5 older siblings immediately declared that their lives among the villagers were finally at an end. They dreamed once again of fine clothes, elegant parties, and the comfort they had lost. Camille was happy to see them smiling again, yet the news did not mean as much to her as it did to the others. She had grown to love their little cottage with its neat garden, the smell of fresh bread, and the simple satisfaction of honest work. Although she wanted her family to be happy, she wasn't sure she wished to return to their old life of luxury and idleness. To reclaim his property, Laurent prepared to travel to the port by horseback, a journey that would take several days. Before leaving, he asked each of his children what gift they would like him to bring back from the city. The older children eagerly requested expensive presents. Silk shoes with sparkling buckles, velvet cloaks, elegant hats, jewels, and other fashionable luxuries. Only Camille remained silent. When her father finally turned to her, she smiled softly and said, "Father, I have always dreamed of seeing a rose. They do not grow in this part of the country, and they are so rare and beautiful. If you could bring me just one rose, in any color, I would be very happy." Laurent laughed gently at her simple request and gladly promised to bring her the finest rose he could find. Privately, Laurent decided that a single rose was not enough. If fortune truly smiled upon him again, he would also bring her a beautiful necklace or another small treasure to reward her kindness. On the morning of his departure, the weather was calm and pleasant. Camille carefully packed his saddlebags with bread, fruit, and other provisions for the journey. She hugged her father goodbye with tears in her eyes and wished him a safe return. Her brothers and sisters, however, were far less sentimental. Having grown accustomed to their father's frequent travels, they were interested only in the expensive gifts they expected him to bring home. As Laurent rode away along the sunlit forest road, Camille stood quietly outside the cottage, watching until he disappeared from sight. A strange feeling of unease settled in her heart, though she couldn't explain why. Meanwhile, Laurent traveled steadily toward the bustling port city, filled with hope that he would recover his fortune. He imagined rebuilding his business, buying new ships, and once again trading in valuable spices, silks, and exotic goods from distant lands. For the first time in years, the future seemed bright. But when Laurent finally reached the port, his hopes were crushed. It was true that one of his missing ships had returned safely with most of its valuable cargo. However, news of its arrival had spread quickly, and his creditors had acted before he could claim it. By the time Laurent reached the harbor, nearly everything had already been seized and sold to repay his debts. He pleaded with merchant after merchant, asking for more time and hoping someone would show mercy. But no one was willing to help. By the end of the day, Laurent was free of debt, but he was also completely penniless. There was nothing left to rebuild his business, and he had no money to buy the gifts he had promised his children. Heartbroken and exhausted, he decided not to spend the night in the city. Without making proper preparations, he climbed back onto his tired horse and began the long journey home. As darkness fell, a violent storm swept across the countryside. Thunder shook the sky, lightning flashed through the trees, and fierce winds lashed the road. Startled by the storm, Laurent's frightened horse suddenly bolted away from the main road, carrying him deep into an unfamiliar forest. Lost in the darkness, Laurent realized too late that traveling at night had been a terrible mistake. Rain poured relentlessly, the wind howled through the trees, and broken branches crashed to the ground around him. Desperately searching for shelter, he urged his frightened horse forward. After what felt like hours, a tall stone wall suddenly appeared through the storm. As he drew closer, he saw a massive iron gate standing slightly open. With no other choice, Laurent pushed the heavy gate wider and led his horse inside. A long stone pathway stretched ahead, disappearing into the darkness. At the end of the path stood an enormous chateau. Even through the driving rain, Laurent could see its towering windows, grand entrance, and imposing walls. The place looked mysterious and intimidating, but it offered the only hope of surviving the storm. He tied his horse beneath a sheltered archway, climbed the wide stone steps, and struck the great iron door knocker. The sound echoed through the silent mansion, but no one answered. Taking a deep breath, Laurent slowly pushed against the massive door. It creaked open, revealing a vast entrance hall lit only by the faint glow of firelight somewhere deeper inside the house. Laurent stepped cautiously into the silent entrance hall. Behind him, the heavy door slowly closed, shutting out the roar of the storm. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening. The mansion was strangely quiet. A magnificent staircase curved upward on both sides of the hall, while rows of ancient suits of armor stood like silent guards. Ahead, warm light spilled through the cracks of a pair of beautifully carved double doors. After calling out several times and receiving no reply, Laurent slowly pushed the doors open. Inside, a great fireplace blazed with comforting warmth. In front of it stood a dining table already prepared for one guest. Fresh bread, roasted meat, vegetables, and a full glass of drink waited as though someone had expected company. The room was filled with elegant furniture, shelves of books, and comfortable chairs, yet there was still no sign of the owner. Laurent sat quietly near the fire, hoping someone would appear. Minutes passed in complete silence. Hunger soon became impossible to ignore. At last, believing the meal would otherwise go to waste, he apologized aloud to the unseen owner and carefully began to eat. At first, Laurent took only a small piece of bread. But as no one appeared, his hunger overcame his hesitation. Soon he had finished the roasted meat, the vegetables, the bread, and finally the drink that had been left on the table. Warm and exhausted after the terrible storm, he leaned back in the comfortable chair before the crackling fireplace. From his pocket, he removed the letter that had once filled him with hope, the message about his recovered ship. Only hours earlier he had dreamed of rebuilding his fortune, but now those dreams had vanished once again. With a heavy sigh, he placed the letter on the table and stared into the dancing flames. The warmth of the fire, the full meal, and the long, difficult journey slowly overcame him. Before he even realized it, Laurent drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. When morning arrived, sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows. Laurent awoke with a start, confused for a moment before remembering where he was. The fire had burned low, the empty dishes still rested on the table, and the mysterious owner of the chateau had still not appeared. Feeling embarrassed for entering a stranger's home without permission, Laurent decided it would be best to leave quietly before the owner returned. He convinced himself that the meal would have gone to waste anyway and hoped he could someday repay the kindness. He stepped carefully into the grand entrance hall, walking silently past the rows of ancient suits of armor. In the morning light, the chateau looked even older than it had the night before. Dust covered the carpets, and the once magnificent halls seemed strangely empty, as though very few people had lived there for many years. With great effort, Laurent pulled open the enormous front door and stepped into the cool morning air. His faithful horse was safe beneath the stone archway exactly where he had left it. Smiling with relief, he reached into his saddlebag and offered the horse an apple that Camille had packed for the journey. Then he untied the reins and slowly began leading the horse down the gate, eager to continue the journey home. As he walked through the overgrown gardens surrounding the chateau, something beautiful suddenly caught his eye. Near the end of the stone pathway stood an old pergola covered with climbing rose vines. In the center of the quiet garden grew a magnificent rose bush unlike anything Laurent had ever seen. Its branches were filled with large, delicate pink roses, each more beautiful than the last. The sweet fragrance drifted through the morning air, and at once Laurent remembered the promise he had made to Camille. She had asked for only a single rose. Smiling softly, he reached into his saddlebag, took out his small knife, and carefully cut a blossom from the bush. Then another. Soon he decided to gather several roses, thinking they would make his daughter even happier after all the disappointment he would have to bring home. So focused was he on the flowers that he never heard the footsteps approaching behind him. Only when a deep, growling voice shattered the silence did Laurent freeze. "What do you think you're doing?" He turned slowly and found himself face to face with a towering, fierce-looking man. The stranger's massive frame, thick facial hair, and harsh expression gave him the appearance of a wild beast rather than an ordinary man. His eyes burned with anger as he stared at the bouquet of roses in Laurent's trembling hands. The towering stranger stood silently for a moment, his sharp eyes fixed on the bouquet of roses in Laurent's hand. At last, he spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "You accepted my hospitality without asking. You ate the meal that had been prepared, slept beside my fire, and now you have taken every blossom from the most precious rose bush on this estate." Laurent lowered his head in shame. "I am truly sorry," he whispered. "I believed no one lived here. The roses were for my youngest daughter. It was the only gift I could bring her after losing everything." The stranger's expression remained cold. "That rose bush was planted by my mother," he said quietly. "It is the last living memory I have of her. Every flower upon it is priceless to me. Laurent felt his heart sink. I have nothing left with which to repay you, he admitted. The stranger looked at him for a long moment before replying. Then you must repay your debt another way. His powerful voice echoed through the silent garden as Laurent waited anxiously for the punishment that was about to follow. Laurent's heart pounded as he struggled to explain himself. He apologized again and again, insisting that he had believed the chateau was abandoned. He admitted eating the meal, sleeping by the fire, and finally cutting the roses, but only because he had promised to bring one home to his youngest daughter, Camille. The fierce stranger listened without interrupting. His face remained cold and unreadable. At last he spoke. You entered my home without permission. You ate the food prepared for me, slept beside my fire, and I was willing to forgive all of that. But these roses... His voice grew heavy. They belong to my late mother. They are the most precious thing I own. There is no treasure in this world I value more. Laurent lowered his head in shame. I have no money, he whispered. Everything I owned is gone. The stranger looked at him for a long moment before answering. Then you will repay your debt with your labor. Stay here and work for me. Laurent's face turned pale. I cannot, he pleaded. I have 6 children waiting for me at home. They depend on me. The stranger's expression did not change. Then one of them must come in your place.